Chapter 7. After the children's lessons the next day, Mrs. Gross asked me, "Have you written the letter?" "Yes, I've written it." I did not tell her that it was still in my pocket. I had to send it. I knew that now. Later, I put it on the table by the front door. One of the servants will find it and take it to town, I thought. In the afternoon, Miles came to me. "Shall I play some music for you?" he asked. He knew that he was winning, and that he was free now. He did not need to fight me. He could be friendly. The music was strange and beautiful. I was almost asleep. When it finished, I jumped up. "Where's Flora?" I asked. "How do I know?" Miles replied. He laughed and started to play again. I looked in my room, but Flora was not there. I went to Mrs. Gross. Mrs. Gross did not know where she was. "Perhaps she's in one of the empty rooms," she said. "I thought that she was with you." Usually I stayed with Flora all the time. "No, she's outside, somewhere quite far away," I answered. Mrs. Gross looked surprised. "Without a hat?" she asked. "That woman doesn't wear a hat," I said. "She's with her. We must find them." Mrs. Gross did not move. "And where is Miles?" "Oh, he's with Quint in the schoolroom. He stayed with me so that Flora could get away. He's free now. He can do what he likes." We stood by the front door. The afternoon was grey and the grass was wet. "You aren't wearing your outdoor clothes," Mrs. Gross said. "It doesn't matter. Flora hasn't got outdoor clothes on either," I replied. "I can't wait to dress. If you want to dress, you must stay behind. Look for Flora upstairs." "And see him?" was her frightened reply. She came outside with me at once. We walked quickly to the lake. I was sure that Flora was there. She wanted to go back there alone, I explained to Mrs. Gross. She and Miles planned this, and I'm sure that Miss Jessel is by the lake now. We arrived at the lake, but we could not see Flora. "She's taken the boat," I said, "and hidden it on the other side. We must walk round and find her." "How could she do all that? She's only a little girl." "No, sometimes she's an old, old woman," I said, "and there's someone with her. You'll see." 10 minutes later, we arrived at the other side of the lake and found the boat there. But where was Flora? We went on, into the next field. "There she is!" we both said at the same time. Flora stood on the grass and smiled. She did not move or speak. She smiled and smiled in a dreadful, silent way. Mrs. Gross threw her arms round the child. Flora stared in surprise at my head without its hat, and said, "Where are your outdoor things?" "Where are yours?" I asked her. "And where's Miles?"
Some customers prefer
she
small
asked.
portions. Some
"If you tell
like
me,
to start with an
I'll
appetizer.
tell you.
Some just
There must
want
be
a
no
main
secrets
course.
now."
Some want mineral water with
Tell
their
you
food.
what?
Some
"Tell me, my dear. Where's Miss Jessel?" Mrs. Gross gave a small scream. In the same second I screamed too. I shook Mrs. Gross's arm and said, "She's there! She's there!" Miss Jessel stood on the other side of the lake. In a way I was glad. It's all true then, I thought. Mrs. Gross will be able to see everything too. I pointed across the lake. Mrs. Gross looked, but Flora did not. She watched my face calmly and seriously. "She's there, you poor unhappy child. You can see her very well." But Mrs. Gross was angry. "What terrible things you say! Where can you see someone? There's nobody there." She could not see anything. And now I was losing everything. That wicked governess was winning. "She's not there," Mrs. Gross continued, talking to Flora now. "You can't see anyone. That poor lady, poor Miss Jessel's dead. We know that, don't we? It's all a mistake, and we're going home now, quickly." Flora was holding on to Mrs. Gross's dress. Her face was suddenly ugly. "I can't see anybody. I never see anything. I don't like you." She turned towards Mrs. Gross. "Take me away from her." "From me?" I asked. "From you! From you!" I stared at the ghost, which was still there. Then I shook my head and said sadly to Flora, "I've lost you. I'm sorry. She's won. I tried to help you. Goodbye." And to Mrs. Gross I said, "Go, go at once." I don't remember anything after that. I was on the ground, crying for a very long time. It was nearly evening when I got up. I went back to the house and up to my room. Flora's things weren't there now. Later, Miles came and sat silently with me. He was not unfriendly. I was very cold, but felt warmer when he was there. Chapter 8. Mrs. Gross came into my room the next morning. Flora was ill. "What does she say?" I asked. "What has she seen?" "I can't ask her," Mrs. Gross said sadly. "But she seems so old now." "Does she talk about Miss Jessel?" "Not a word." "They're so clever, that woman and Flora. Flora will never speak to me again, and she'll tell her uncle about me. What a terrible governess, he'll think." "Shall I leave now?" I continued. "That's what Flora wants, isn't it?" She agreed. "She doesn't want to see you again." "Well then," I said, "you must go. You must take Flora away to her uncle's. I'll stay here with Miles. But the two children must not meet alone together, not for 3 seconds." "Yes, you're right. Flora must leave this house. We'll go this morning. And I can't stay. Flora is saying such terrible things. Dreadful words. Dreadful things. Where did she learn them?" She was crying now. "You believe me, then?" I asked her. "Oh, yes, I do. I must take Flora far away, far from them," she said. "My letter, it will arrive in town first," I said. She shook her head. "No, it won't. It's disappeared." "What do you mean?" "It disappeared from the table by the front door. The other servants haven't seen it. Miles took it?" This was terrible. Then he's read it. So he's a thief. He was stealing letters at school then. I must talk to him. If he talks to me, we can save him." The servants were surprised when Flora left with Mrs. Grose. They stared at me silently when I walked through the house. But Miles did not seem worried. We ate lunch together in the large dining room. "Is Flora very ill?" he asked me. "She'll get better in London. Take some meat, Miles," I said. He filled his plate, and we ate quickly. Miles got up and stood with his back to me and his hands in his little pockets. We did not speak while the servant took the plates away. "Well," Miles said, "we're alone now." "Not quite alone," I answered. "Of course there are the others," he said. "But they're not important, are they?" He walked to the window and put his face against the glass. Was he looking for something or somebody? "Have you enjoyed yourself today?" I asked. "Oh, yes. I'm so free now. I walked miles and miles. I went everywhere." "And do you like it?" "Do you?" he replied. "You are more alone now." "It doesn't matter," I said. "I'm happy to be here. And why am I still here? For you, of course." He stared at me, and his little face was both handsome and serious. "You're staying here just for me?" "Yes. I'm your friend, and I want to help you. I told you so that night in your bedroom. Do you remember?" "Yes. But you wanted something from me too." "Yes. Tell me everything, Miles. That's what I want." "Ah, you're staying here so that I can tell you everything." "Well, yes, it's true." "Now?" he asked. "It's a good time. Or do you want to go out again?" "Yes, I want to go out very much." He picked up his hat and was ready to leave. "I'll tell you everything, I promise. But later. Not now." "Why not now?" He turned to the window again and was silent. "I have to see the gardener," he said. He was lying, I knew it. Someone was waiting for him outside. "Well then," I said, "tell me just one little thing before you go. Did you take my letter from the table by the door?" Then, in that same second, I saw the terrible face of Peter Quint at the window again. The room changed, and everything felt bad. But Miles saw nothing. "Yes, I took it," he said. I took him in my arms. He could not see the ghost, and he was not lying now. These were two good things. The face still stared at us through the glass. "Why did you take it?" "I wanted to know what you wrote about me," he said. "And did you open the letter?" I asked. "I opened it, and then I burnt it," he said. "And did you do this at school? Did you steal letters and burn them? Did you steal other things, Miles?" "Me?" he asked. "Steal?" His voice told me that this was a terrible question. My face was red. "Well, why can't you go back? What did you do then?" I said things," the boy replied, "to a few people. And then the masters heard about it. That's all." "What things?" I asked. But he didn't say. Perhaps he really was innocent.
Didn't they tell you? Well, there were some bad things. Perhaps they were too bad for a letter.
But the face at the window came closer. It wanted to stop Miles, to stop his true answers. I screamed and held Miles again. "No more! No more!" I shouted to the ghost.
Is she here?
Miles asked, and turned his eyes to the window, but he could still see nothing. "She?" I asked.
Miss Jessel! Miss Jessel!
He shouted in anger. I understood then. He was thinking about Flora's story. No, it's not Miss Jessel, but that other dreadful face, that wicked man. He's at the window for the last time. He got angrier then, and the room felt worse.
He is here then?
He asked. Who? I had to ask him.
Peter Quint, of course! Where is he?
He looked round the room.
Where?
It doesn't matter, I said. I have you now. You are mine, not his. He has lost you forever.
There! There!
I pointed. But Miles saw nothing. He screamed like an animal, like a person who has lost everything. He's falling, I thought. I must catch him and save him. I held him hard, very hard. And then Miles and I were alone together in a quiet afternoon. But suddenly his little heart stopped, and I realized what I was holding. I was holding a dead child, not a living one.